Welcome to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Elizabeth. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, welcome back. We have made it a couple weeks into the season. I know most of you are done planting. Unfortunately, some of us are still trying to figure out what to do here in the home stretch with the weather conditions we've been having. And speaking of weather, it's that time of year for us to sit down with Dr. Erin Wilson, our extension climatologist, and talk about what we're seeing and what we can expect here through the rest of the summer. So welcome, Erin.
Hi, Elizabeth. It's great to be here again, of course, and a little bit later usually than our typical summer podcast, but we can just consider it a weather effect, right, of delays and schedules and things.
Yeah, it's been a wild spring so far. I know Amanda and I have both been scrambling trying to get field work done when it's not raining. And I know all of our farmer listeners have been experiencing that same frustration. So, Erin, do you want to kick us off by giving us a recap of the conditions we've seen that have been driving all of this irritation for us?
Yeah, so when we were together last time, we talked about what we thought the spring was looking like. One of the things, obviously, we were coming off of was the big drought last year, 2024. We had a lot of capacity to take on soil moisture throughout the winter, and we really discussed how winter hadn't provided really a good boost to the soil moisture, especially across eastern and southeastern Ohio. And we were a bit concerned. I think a lot of talk last time was about, well, this isn't a great period of making forecasts into the future. And are we going to slide back toward drought? Or are we going to go the way that the models were indicating, which were toward wetter conditions? And early spring conditions in March were quite dry and pretty warm as well. So if we didn't see that pattern switch, we were going to have to worry about drought again. Well, we don't have to worry about drought, right? After some of the conditions that we saw, at least over a good portion of the state. Because we did in fact start to get some of that wetter spring conditions and then a bit too wet and cool as we head later into the season. So if we look back over the spring, which we consider meteorologically March, April, and May, it generally got closer to average and then cooler than average as we went through the season. So March started off really warm, 7th warmest March for Ohio. Temperatures well above average in the 5 to 10 degrees above average for the month. We followed that with a fairly warm April, although much of eastern or western and northern Ohio were closer to average. 28th warmest April on record back to 1895. And then we followed that with even cooler conditions, 2 to 4 degrees below average in May. Not great timing, right? 52nd coldest May. So even as chilly as it was, there are 51 cooler May conditions over the last 131 years there. So we really struggled, right, with GDD accumulation throughout the months of April and May in those field conditions, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more. Precipitation wise, we also had a pretty big switch. Again, March was dry, 48th driest. Really dry in the east, a little bit wetter in the west, and that was the signal that was coming in that continued then into April. Very wet April, 15th wettest on record, especially across southwest Ohio. That's where it was really wet. So Brown County, Claremont County, even up into Clinton, Warren, and Greene and other areas, really wet, 175 to 200% of normal there. And then following that with May conditions, which lighter rain fell, but the problem with May is that most locations saw 18 to 21 days with at least a trace of rainfall. So you combine that with 3 or 4 degree cooler than average temperatures, a lack of sunshine. Man, things were really tough during the month of May.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most notable things for me in May was the frustration of having to turn my furnace back on after turning it off a little early in March. I think this is the closest I've ever come to running out of propane. But, Amanda and I've got that hay research at the solar farm, and we were watching that stuff get tall and not being able to get out there and make hay because there was not a favorable forecast to get it mowed and then get it dried. I talked to farmers that were getting rained out of the same field 2 or 3 times. So it was a very frustrating planting season, to say the least.
Yeah, it seemed like just as conditions were close, right? The second day, more rain would come along the second or third day, and then we were right back to square one. And without the heat, there was very little evaporation or loss of that moisture. So that was, kind of compounding the effects of a cool, wet May.
Yeah, I mean, we're still looking at, as you drive around the state and see some of these crops trying to to pull themselves together with the heat units we're finally getting, we're seeing the symptoms of those early struggles. A lot of that crop sat with wet feet, and we will see later in the season how that plays out. You can definitely tell the fields that are getting side dressed right now in the way they perk up. That corn starts looking a lot better once we get some nitrogen. Hopefully, we get some drier weather that can drive those root systems down a little bit and let them get a break from the sogginess that those crops have experienced since they went in. Usually we talk about severe weather. This year's been one of those years where I think we talked about it about a week ago. We haven't really had as much.
Yeah, certainly compared to last year, we haven't had nearly the number of tornadoes. We were sitting, I think, at this point last year, close to 65 tornadoes for the season. Our typical average season is about 20 to 22. And that's where we are right now. As of June 18th, we were at 21 tornadoes. So about a third or a quarter of where we were last year, but still normal for the entire year. And we know we'll have more severe weather throughout the months of July. Kind of tapers down a little bit in July and August, September, and then we have that later season, October, November, secondary spike as well. So it's likely we'll see, more severe weather. We did have some big hail systems and lots of hail storms around, even some deep hail, inches of hail falling in some of our locations across Southern Ohio. I know in your area, in area of Southwest Ohio there, we saw some counties pick up 2.5, 3 inches of hail. Obviously that's an insurer's nightmare conditions, but roofers were out and about trying to get estimates and help folks out. But thankfully, a lot of the crops, because they were a bit delayed, right, didn't suffer major damage, machine gun hail, some of the pictures we've seen in Iowa here, even in June. So if there's any silver lining, the timing was okay, right, from a crops perspective. And we've also seen some big wind as well, some big trees down and things. But again, because our corn, for instance, not quite as tall, I don't think we've seen as much, any major reports of green snapping or damage, have we?
Not that I've heard. I know some corn was leaning after that storm, that big windstorm we had come through. The good news is this time of year, that corn is still pretty flexible, especially with the amount of rain we've had. A lot of that crop hasn't had time to get brittle yet. So may lean for a couple days, but usually stands back up. And everything I've driven by has popped back up here over the last week.
Yeah, what about wheat lodging, Elizabeth, in terms of like not being able to get out as harvest begins now here across Southern Ohio, but things being very wet? Has there been any issue from that perspective?
I've heard reports of some wheat that's been down. Yeah, we've reached that critical point where it's not going to bounce back as well. As we're recording this, we're sitting in the middle of the heat wave that's going to push a lot of our wheat, at least in Southern Ohio, to the finish line. And we're looking at a forecast of pop-up storms. So there's definitely a risk. By the time you guys are listening to this, you may have wheat down that was up when we were recording. Honestly, one of the worst times when we're talking about the wheat crop to have a forecast of rain for the next 7 days. Luckily, I think it's pop-up, so some of us will get lucky, but some of us will not. And it is hard to plan harvest logistics around a forecast that looks like that.
Yeah, indeed.
Continuing to look into the future, what do you see now as we look into July to push us into what's going to most likely, with our planting conditions, be a very wide pollination window for our corn crop?
Yeah, so here we are. We're recording at the end of June, and like you mentioned already, we're in like this massive heat wave across a big portion of the eastern states in our country here, which challenges the electric grids. And we've got several days of heat here to go into the 1st of July. So hopefully those things will be okay. But we've been kind of the difference, I think I alluded to this, but of late, southern, eastern, northeastern Ohio have remained fairly wet, even as things have dried out a bit, north central, west central, and northwest Ohio. Not to the point of any drought concerns or anything like that, but that makes this time last year, we were also talking about it being in the midst of a heat wave and kicking off the drought. Conditions were dry. We didn't have that soil moisture, that moisture at the surface. This year, we've got a lot of the ponding, a lot of those fields that are still drying and giving up that water with high evaporation rates. So we've seen dew point temperatures, which is a measure of the amount of moisture in the atmosphere, flirting at times with that 80-degree. And that just means soupy, really wet conditions, humid conditions that as then we get warmer into the mid to even upper 90s that we've seen this week, afternoon humidities drop because of that and some windier conditions. But yeah, it's been a bit more humid with those conditions that are likely driving some of that rapid advancement of wheat in terms of the heat. And then the corn development as well. That forecast right now, conditions, even with the heat, soil moisture looks pretty good. Our stream flows are doing well. There's no major signs of drought right now. Some drying, right? So we want to keep an eye on that because July and August are almost impossible times to make up soil moisture deficits, but we're not dealing with big moisture deficits this year as well. So we're going to, I think, as we head into the first week of July, we're going to ratchet it down a notch. We're going to move this high pressure that's been anchored over southeastern U.S. It's provided what we refer to as a heat dome or persistent hot conditions. Even this morning, it was 87 degrees at 8:30 this morning. That's not what we like to see in Ohio, right? But we do think we're going to ratchet that down the first week of July, closer to average temperatures, mid upper 80s. It is summer. 4th of July is always hot and humid. So that's what we're looking at. Overnight lows probably back in the 60s to low 70s, which is good. And really overall, our guidance suggests that July and really July through September periods are expected to be are leaning toward warmer than average conditions. I would again kind of hedge against warmer overnight lows, especially if it's wet, which is what the guidance is showing is a wetter than average summer. July tends to be still in that 3 to 4 inch range for the month. August gets a little bit drier, 2 to 3 inches for the month of August. But we're expecting conditions to be a little bit warmer and wetter than average throughout the rest of the summer. So I do think we have opportunities for plenty of rainfall during pollination, during grain fill. So things are looking, and of course with the heat, kind of advancing the overall crop development with more growing degree to heating units out there as well. So it looks favorable for those that were able to get in on time. But there are certainly other considerations, right? Giving humid, wet conditions for the next few months.
Yeah, I think when we think about late planting, especially with corn, one of those concerns is that we are going to run out of moisture when we start hitting those key physiological stages. If you're telling me that we're going to have adequate rainfall moving through August, I feel pretty good about our prospects with some of that later planted corn. But the combines will tell us the whole story later this fall. The other thing that comes to mind when you talk about that heat and that moisture as we move through the season is disease pressure. And so you're describing conditions that are really good for some of those leaf diseases. A lot of rainfall and humidity at silking is a risk when we talk about those ear rots and vomitoxin. So this might be a good year it's definitely a good year to be out in your fields and scout and look for that disease pressure. If you're starting to see that symptomology at those key times, fungicide is probably something that would be good to consider. If you're wanting to, I'm going to put in a shameless plug for our on-farm research. If you're interested in understanding whether that fungicide is paying you back, we would love to partner with you guys to do some fungicide trials. We also have a protocol trying to better understand tar spot, mostly scouting focused. So if you're willing to let us come out and look at your cornfields and give you a heads up if we find tar spot, we're really excited to try to learn more about what is causing some fields to experience more tar spot, why sometimes tar spot has more of an yield impact than other times. So if you're willing to help us out, get in touch with either me, Elizabeth, or your local county educator, and we will get you set up for some trials. Because thanks to Aaron, we've got a heads up that we've got some risk and we can see if we can collect some data to help us better manage those risks this year and in the future. When we start talking about disease and pests, another factor, weather we know is a major driver. Another factor are those weather patterns that help blow that up from the south. Aaron, what do you see in terms of those factors and the way that weather is going to influence us here through the rest of the season?
Yeah, so this week here at the end of June, we've been under that high pressure as we talked about, and that's limited a lot of like the southerly flow for us. It's just been stagnant air, but air flows around those high pressure systems. It flows clockwise, and it's already that last week of June brought moisture up from Hurricane Eric that came ashore in southern Mexico. and dumping really heavy rains across Nebraska, Iowa, and Minnesota. And eventually this week, it's also going to bring what is increasing our chance of thunderstorms late this week as well. So the pattern overall, as we look at that July, August, September period, would put, that typical Bermuda high-ish type pattern, so off the Atlantic coast. And that provides plenty of that clockwise motion and then southerly flow from areas like the Gulf of Mexico or from the tropical Pacific. But that southerly flow then will also bring the potential for those pests that might meander or be brought into the region later in the season, like fall armyworm and others that we'll have to also pay attention to. So in recent past, we've had some years primarily dominated by northwest flow, keeping temperatures a little cooler, also bringing a ton of wildfire smoke into the atmosphere. This summer, the pattern overall, right, there's still weather variability week to week and day to day, but overall the pattern would favor more southerly flow and perhaps more influx, not only in moisture, but also in those potential pests throughout the season as well.
Nothing but good news here on this podcast.
Well, I think we let our listeners kind of prepare for the worst, hoping for the best as usual. Weather always throws those wrenches in, as we know, but I think we're getting used to the chaos and chaotic nature of our seasons here each year. So
Yeah, in the years we've been recording with you, Aaron, I don't know that we've ever seen two seasons that were alike. So I never know what we're going to learn when we talk to you. So as always, Aaron, it's been great having you. If folks want to keep up with you here over the next few months, what are some ways for them to keep getting information from you on a regular basis?
Yeah, you could always hit me up for email, wilson.1010@osu.edu if you just want to chat or have questions about the weather. You can call the State Climate Office also at 614-292-7930. Happy to take calls as well. You can always find some more information at climate.osu.edu. I would encourage those listening to sign up for our monthly and quarterly climate summaries. It's only a 2, 3, 4-page document kind of highlighting the previous month and the previous season, similar to what we talk about today. And then also, as you think about the fall, not exactly sure when we'll do our fall podcast, but of course we'll have one. Farm Science Review will be here before we know it, right around the corner here in September. We're going to have a big presence about weather resilience to severe weather issues and thinking about buildings and building design and other things. So just keep it in the back of your minds to maybe seek us out there at Farm Science Review, the Fireball Building with Extension or others to talk about some weather resilience. So as we deal with the chaotic nature of weather, of course, we want to help farmers maintain their profitability. And one way to do that is to build resilience. And so it's an exciting project with Nationwide that you and I are part of, but we'll have some more information at Farm Science Review this year about that as well. So reach out anytime and we'll talk the weather. We always like talking about weather here and always feel welcome on this podcast with you, Elizabeth. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks again, Aaron, and everybody stay safe out there. Make sure you're staying hydrated in the heat and good luck until we talk to you again.
Thanks for listening to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. Join us again in 2 weeks for our next episode.
Hey, podcast listeners. Just a reminder to give us a like or subscribe so you know when we release new episodes. If you're enjoying the podcast, be sure to leave us a review also. We appreciate the comments.